All right, let's get into the mailbag. This week's mailbag is open for business, and Frank Klose is back, 97.3 ESPN.com, Phillies insider. He just wrote a story about the mascot creators responding to the, quote, new Phillie Phanatic. Now, Frank could talk about, I believe, the comparison that I made. And, Frank, I made the comparison, and you're going to Clearwater when? Friday. You have been to the original Hooters, correct?
I have.
Have you been to Kerr's Wing House down there?
I have.
All right. Is it not the same exact restaurant?
Yeah, pretty much.
Sir, do you swear to tell the whole truth?
So is this what we're looking at here? That the Phillies did enough tweaking to say, hey, I'm Kerr's Wing House, and the former Phanatic is the original Hooters?
Well, the thing that I look at here is they argue that the Phillies were sold the copyrights to the costume, and then that 35-year period ended. But then I want to know why this company can sell Slyly and that be another mascot to the Hiroshima Carp. I don't know if you saw my piece, or I encourage you to check out my podcast tonight at 6, but Slyly looks just like the Phanatic, except they tweaked maybe 6 things. Well, those same 6 things are the things that the Phanatic changed this time around. So what I want to know is, if the Phillies had the copyright, how could this costume company sell other mascots that look just like them and not violate that copyright if the Phillies are somehow infringing upon the copyright now?
So you feel that the Phillies did enough to say, hey, who is it? Harrison Erickson, go pound sand.
Either they did enough, or Harrison Erickson owe the Phillies for Slyly and this whole host of other mascots that have come out over the years that look exactly like the Phanatic from this same company.
So is this now in the past, do you think, for the Phillies, Frank? Like, everyone went nuts on Friday, this past Friday, when the announcement of changes were coming, and we heard about the lawsuit last year, but is this finally now in the past, or do you think something else could come of it?
I think this is just getting started.
Wow.
It was.
Now,
well,
see,
Harrison
Frank,
Erickson,
the Kerr's Wing House won the lawsuit due to a frivolous lawsuit. They threw it out, and they actually were awarded $1.4 million.
Well, I just got this response this afternoon from Harrison Erickson. It looks like they sent it around to some media outlets offering their side of things. It sounds like they're ready to fight, too. So I think this is just going to escalate some more.
Wow.
What we don't know right now is what Harrison Erickson wants from the Phillies. So, I mean, if a lot of people just say, we'll just pay them the money and be done with it. Well, if this amount is so outrageous that the Phillies can't possibly justify it, well, then why even entertain it? And then what I really want to know is, what value is the Phanatic to this company if it doesn't have the Phillies hat, if it doesn't have the Phillies jersey, if it doesn't have the character as portrayed by the Phillies employees Dave Raymond and Tom Burgoyne over the years? So, what value does a Nick Phanatic actually have?
Yeah, I mean, because the whole point was they were trying to suggest that if the Phillies didn't pay them, that they would make the Phanatic a free agent. In other words, they could approach the Mets and say, hey, do you want the Metropolitan Phanatic? Right?
Yeah, that seems to be what they were suggesting, but I just don't see how that necessarily works for Harrison Erickson anyway. Really, if you're another Major League Baseball team, are you going to try to add that mascot? I mean, I don't know that any other team would actually go down that road.
Probably not.
What was in just one more question about this. Do you know, the details of the contract? We were talking about this earlier, and I was like, well, maybe they're not in the wrong, the Harrison company. Because if they signed a contract and said, we're giving you this trademark idea, this logo, this mascot for 30 years, and in 30 years the deal is up, you have to either re-sign and pay us or move on. I don't know who's in the right and who's in the wrong, I guess is the point.
I did read through the court filings, and really what the law that's really the issue here is, after January 1st, 1978, what they tried to do was protect people from having their creative works, basically people being taken advantage of and somebody else profiting off of them. So after January 1st, 1978, if there's an artistic creation, you have 35 years of control if you sell it. And then after 35 years, it can be offered back. Now, that's also a little bit fuzzy with the math, too, because they came to an agreement in 1984. Does that sort of reset the whole thing? or did they lose that opportunity to make up a lawsuit at that point?
Do the Phillies have right of first refusal, Frank, or if it's like, hey, if you don't agree to our terms, they become a free agent, or do they have to offer the Phillies first opportunity?
Well, I think this is a really complicated case, too, because the Phillies are arguing that it was copyrighted as a statue, not as an actual costume. So, the living, breathing Phanatic, the Phillies claim is basically that they were co-creators here the whole time. And what I want to know, too, is if the law went into effect January 1st, 1978, and the Phanatic debuted April 25th, 1978, was it actually created with just in that less than 4-month window, or did that creation begin even before 1970? So I think there's so many different angles here and I'm certainly not a lawyer, but there seems so many different angles here that people can argue that I feel like this is gonna go on for a little while.
All right, let's get into the mailbag questions that our listeners asked this week. At Frank Klose on Twitter. That's Frank Klose with a K, Klose. Don't forget the Powder Blue podcast tonight from 6 to 7 with more Phillies topics. But first, let's get into this week's mailbag and start with hindsight. We love hindsight. See, not a lot of second-guessing in hockey, but in baseball, hindsight. A.J. Puck or Mickey Moniak, number 1 overall?
Yeah, this is a tough one. So, 2016, that was the first year I was with you guys, and that was the year that the Phillies drafted Mickey Moniak first overall. And I know leading up into that draft, we said the name A.J. Puck a lot of times as we were looking towards the draft. And ultimately what the Phillies decided to do was draft Mickey Moniak, that first overall pick, and Puck ended up going to the Oakland Athletics later. And now A.J. Puck made his Major League debut late last season, had a few appearances out of the pen, and he's the Athletics' second top prospect at this point, and he looks like he's in a position to make a real impact in the Oakland Athletics starting rotation this year. So it really makes it easy to say, well, we're not seeing any dividends in Philadelphia just yet. Could that be a bad deal? So I think there's two things that need to happen here to really get a good sense of the deal. First, A.J. Puck has to show that he's healthy for an extended period of time. Now, 2018, Puck has Tommy John surgery already and missed the entire year. So if he has another injury, then maybe you'll start thinking, okay, that was a little bit of a risk. I think the Phillies thought it was a risk when they did not draft him. But will he stay healthy? And then the other half of it, too, is the Phillies drafted Moniak with the idea that they could sign him for less money and then throw some money at Kevin Gowdy in the second round. Now, Gowdy has had his injury problems, and he's kind of coming back. And if he becomes something, then you're kind of looking at the whole package there. So right now, it might seem like that the Oakland Athletics are getting higher dividends immediately, but we still need to see what's going to happen with Mickey Moniak. And he'll probably be in AAA this year. He was super young when the Phillies drafted him. He could come up if there are some injuries, so you'll probably see him starting in center field at AAA, and he'll be there for a midseason replacement if they need somebody.
Any way that Alec Baum breaks camp with the team, if he ends up showing up and having a strong performance in spring training, and that's from Harrison.
I think Alec Boehm is definitely starting at AAA no matter what. I mean, I think a lot would have to go wrong for the Phillies and multiple injuries before that happens. And, there's two reasons for that. First is Boehm played at 3 different levels last year, none of them AAA. So you think that he would want to get some exposure at AAA, at least for a little while before he comes up. Now, he rose from level to level very, very fast last year. And, he might only need a little bit of time in AAA, and he could come help the Phillies in a little bit. And the second reason is the Phillies have a lot of options right now. So in terms of infielders to back up their starting infield, so you're going to have some combination of Scott Kingery, Didi Gregorius, and Gene Segura in those 3 infield positions. And behind them, they've got a lot of veteran guys that they may want to hang on to as much as possible. So even if there happens to be an injury in the Phillies infield, they still have Neil Walker, they still have Josh Harrison, they still have Phil Gosselin, they still have Logan Forsythe. So they might want to hang on to those guys a little bit longer before rushing somebody like him to the major leagues. And that's not to say, though, that Boehm isn't going to have a real opportunity to turn some heads this spring. He had a hit today down in Bradenton, I did notice. But I think they're going to make sure he gets to AAA. And let's face it, too, there's the service time issue that if he comes up after May, well, then the Phillies have him for 6 more years after this year. And this is a lot different than the Scott Kingery situation we were talking about a couple of years ago when Scott Kingery actually had at-bats at AAA.
All right, let's move on to the last one here, the Phillies mailbag every Tuesday with Frank. And, of course, tonight, 6 to 7, the Powder Blue podcast you can hear on 97.3 ESPN. But this question is an interesting one because it involves Nick Pivetta. Is this the year Nick Pivetta breaks out?
Well, it's been about 5 years since the Phillies traded closer Jonathan Papelbon to the Nats for Nick Pivetta. And, 2017, he came up. He had some mixed results. He was kind of rushed a little bit. But then, you figured at 2018, okay, well, here's some time for him to work some things out. And then he struggled some more. And then you said, okay, well, 2019 is going to be the year that he really gets to break out, and it didn't happen. I personally, for one, am a little bit skeptical about Nick Pivetta, the starter. What I tend to think, and we'll see what happens, I tend to think that especially now as he's working on some new pitches, he's working on a good slider, a new changeup pitch, that could be really effective in the bullpen. Pivetta can bring some high 90s heat, and if he's got that changeup to pair with it, that's what you want to see somebody towards the back of the bullpen to sort of keep those late inning hitters off their feet. And I don't think it's very clear that he's worked out as a starter so far, and I just don't know how much more patience they can put into that position. If I were the Phillies, I would have gotten one more starter that could come into camp and try to compete with these guys. But as I told you before, I can easily see this fifth spot in the rotation going to Ranger Suarez. If I think Pivetta and Velasquez need to make a bigger statement this spring if they're going to claim the spot. And despite what people say publicly, they had to have seen what happened the last 2 years.
All right, Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. Don't forget, by the way, it was Arrieta getting the start today. I'm not sure if you have any update on how he fared, but Velasquez pitched well yesterday, 2 innings. Also, Nola pitched well, 2 innings on Monday, but Pivetta did not pitch well on Saturday or Sunday, but apparently Saturday Pivetta pitched, Sunday Nola, yesterday was Velasquez, today is Arrieta, but it's a split squad, so I don't know who's pitching the other game, but apparently Pivetta too working on a changeup and get that into the mix as well. So if Arrieta threw well today?
So Arrieta threw about 39 pitches. I did catch Kevin Franson on MLB Network, and Kevin actually saw him in person, and Kevin Franson was saying that the best part about today was 39 pitches, and he was able to really get back out on the mound. And he said, he's basically saying for a guy like Arrieta at this point, you're not looking for immediate results. And yeah, he did give up a few runs today, but really getting out there, fastball in the low 90s. But mainly it was that he's back on the mound there. And then down in Bradenton, I do believe it was Suarez that was getting the start down there. It's hard to keep track of 2 games at once in the spring, right? But I did catch that Alec Boehm did have a hit down there in Bradenton, and let me just double check here. Phillies are up 1-0 in Bradenton right now, and let's see here. Of course, now that the internet's going to fail me now that I'm live on the air, right? That's usually when that happens. But yeah, so in terms of the Phillies pitching, Ranger Suarez 2 shutout innings down in Bradenton, and the Phillies lead 1-0.
There you go. Frank Klose will be back on Thursday with more on the Phillies. He'll be in Clearwater on Friday. And, of course, you can get the Powder Blue podcast tonight from 6 to 7. And all the Phillies coverage from Frank at 97.3 ESPN.com. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Frank Klose, like all guests, appear to be the Boardwalk Honda hotline.